Good morning everybody, and welcome to this week's Oasis service in my house. As you can see, I've found something to light the candles with. In truth, we had this last time, but I didn't realise it had a naked flame on it. Better put that somewhere safe. Thank you for joining me, and our hearts to be full of your love. Amen. So this morning, it's the first Sunday after Lent. We will be thinking about one of the resurrection appearances. The one that is the only one that appears in John's Gospel only, because this week we're finishing off our sermon series in John's Gospel. We started that way back in January, and who would have guessed then where we would find ourselves now? But on the way we've touched on highlights in John's Gospel, the wedding at Cana, Jesus' very first miracle. We've also thought about the feeding of the 5,000. We've thought about the significance of the number 7, and we've linked John's Gospel to our study of Revelation last year. So our reading for today is taken from John's Gospel, chapter 21. After this, Jesus appeared again to the disciples, this time at the Tiberias Sea, the Sea of Galilee. This is how he did it. Simon Peter, Thomas, nicknamed Twin, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the brother Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were together. Simon Peter announced, "I'm going fishing." The rest of them replied, "We're going with you." They went out and got in the boat. They caught nothing that night. When the sun came up, Jesus was standing on the beach, but they didn't recognise him. Jesus spoke to them. "Good morning. Did you catch anything for breakfast?" They answered, "No." He said, "Throw the net off the right side of the boat and see what happens." They did what he said. All of a sudden there were so many fish in it they weren't strong enough to pull it in. Then the disciple Jesus loved said to Peter, "It's the Master." When Simon Peter realised it was the Master, he threw on some clothes, for he was stripped for work, and dived into the sea. The other disciples came by boat, for they weren't far from land, 100 yards or so, pulling along the net full of fish. When they got out of the boat, they saw a fire laid with fish and bread cooking on it. Jesus said, "Bring some of the fish you've just caught." Simon Peter joined them and pulled the net to shore. 153 big fish, and even with all those fish, the net didn't rip. Jesus said, "Breakfast is ready." Not one of the disciples dared ask, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Master. Jesus then took the bread and gave it to them. He did the same with the fish. This was now the 3rd time Jesus had shown himself alive to the disciples since being raised from the dead. So, our Bible reading, a trip to the beach, an outdoor breakfast on the beach. Be lovely to go to the beach, wouldn't it? It's a glorious sunny day out there. Hands up who'd really like to go to the beach. Yeah, I would too. Okay, I can't promise you sea, but come with me and let's go on a trip to the beach. This way. With flip-flops on, ready for me to the beach. Oh, nearly forgot. Need my barbecue. So, here we are at the beach. I've got the bread. I've got my fish though. I've got some sand. That's up, dip on my toes in the sand. It's a bit wet. I've even got shells. Can't quite hear any seagulls or any seabirds. Might be able to hear some songbirds out in the garden though. Oh look, there's a big seagull just gone over there. So, that reading then resonated in so many ways with our situation today. The disciples were in a sort of lockdown in a locked room, unsure what to do, where to go. They'd lost their leader, they'd lost their direction. A bit like us, we've lost our direction. We've lost our weekly kind of connection, or our being able to just drop into church. And however much we've tried to carry that on virtually, it's kind of not the same. So what did they decide to do? They decided to break free, to return to the things that they knew, the things that they were comfortable with, the things that they knew they were good at, and they made a break for it. They went off to do some fishing, because the majority of them were fishermen. That was something that they could rely on. They'd been doing that for most of their lives before Jesus turned up. Didn't quite work out though, did it? There they were. They must have felt at peace, comfortable. Perhaps we feel like that as we go on our daily exercise or working in our gardens. The fact that we have got the outdoors to be part of. It's funny, isn't it? It does make you feel better connecting with the outdoors, and the weather has certainly been nice enough to do that. So the disciples went off on the lake fishing, but even that wasn't good enough. They seem to have lost all their skills. Can you imagine how despondent they must have felt? Even their skills as fishermen had deserted them. And then suddenly they noticed a figure on the beach, building a fire. Obviously cooking. They could have smelled what he was cooking. They must have wondered what was going on. And then the stranger approached them and said, "Have you caught anything?" "No," they said. This kind of echoes and links back into the calling of the disciples in Luke's Gospel, when they had a huge catch of fish. And it must have resonated, particularly with Peter, who was always so impulsive. Suddenly something clicked, and he realised who the figure was on the beach. Typical Peter. At least he stopped to put some clothes on, I guess. He dived in again, calling back memories of walking on water that Peter tried to do, keeping his faith on Jesus. And then he realised it was Jesus. The others followed on, and their nets were overflowing. Again, a link to the feeding of the 5,000, with Jesus feeding people with bread and fish, and there still being enough left over. Here we have a similar meal. Bread, I forgot to bring the bread out, and some fish. An abundance. So Jesus was showing that he was going to still care for them. He might not be with them all the time, but he could care for them and look after them. The reading then goes on to talk about Peter and Peter's kind of rehabilitation, if you like. He'd let Jesus down badly, even though he swore he wouldn't. And Jesus knew that to get Peter on side, to make Peter strong enough to do the job that Jesus had in store for him, he had to give him his confidence back. So he asked him the loaded question 3 times, "Do you love me?" And each time he gave him a job to do. Because let's face it, don't we all feel better when we've got a job to do? I know I have. I've been very pleased to go off and do shopping runs and prescription runs for people in these trying times, because it's made me feel as though I'm doing something. For those of you that are stuck at home, sorry, not stuck at home, you might feel the same way. But I've got a challenge for you. I love giving you a challenge. If I'm working, why shouldn't you? My challenge to you is, why not use these now extra 3 weeks of lockdown that we've got? Why not use them as a retreat, as a time to meet with God, to meet with Jesus, to build up your spiritual life, to make yourselves stronger? Perhaps there's an app the Church of England have introduced called Easter Pilgrims. You can access it online, or you can get it on your phones. I'd urge you to do that. They're looking at the Lord's Prayer, and it's very good. 10 minutes a day, just spent doing that. Maybe you could deepen other things. Rev Chris has talked about reflective practice, and he sent out on the email the triangle. Perhaps try and do some of that, so that when this lockdown is lifted, we're ready to go out again into the community stronger and more knowledgeable of our relationship with Jesus, with the risen Christ, ready to show that relationship to everybody else who, in these times of crisis, is looking to the church, has called upon the church, and the church is now seen to be a guiding light. And that light is what we want people to carry on. So use this time to be stronger, to make your spiritual life stronger, so that we can face all the battles ahead. And now let's turn to our time of prayer. Lord Jesus, help us to know you. Help us to use our time wisely over the next couple of weeks, to reconnect with you, to make our spiritual life stronger, so that we can reflect your glory in the world around us. Amen. God of compassion, be close to all of those who are ill and in intensive care. In their anxiety, be their consolation. In their fear, be their hope. In their darkness, be their light. Through Jesus, who suffered alone on the cross, but reigns with you in glory. Amen. And now we say together the Lord's Prayer. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us our sins, as we forgive those who sin against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For the kingdom, the power, and the glory are yours, now and forever. Amen. So that concludes the end of our Oasis service for this week. Next week you've got Rev Barry for a communion service in his kitchen. It's really good how we can keep this community going, the sense of community going. And with that in mind, I'd like us to finish with the grace. If you're looking at this on a laptop or a tablet, where you can see the names of people down the side who are also watching this service, please focus on their names and give them a nod and a smile as you would if we were all together in church, as we finish with the grace. So we say together, may the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, Father, Son and Holy Spirit, be with us all, now and forever. Amen. Have a good week, everybody, and remember, try and do something useful every day.